I never imagined that a single knock on my door on a quiet Thursday evening in Annapolis would pull back the curtain on years of quiet deceptions inside my own family. The wind off the Chesapeake was sharp that night, carrying the first real bite of autumn, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. My name is Jessica Reynolds. I am 34 years old, and until that moment I had believed the stories my family told about loyalty and looking out for one another. I had believed them because believing felt easier than asking the questions that might have broken everything apart. The man standing on my front step was not someone I expected. Peter Lang had been a quiet presence in my father's circle for as long as I could remember, the kind of family friend who showed up for holidays but never stayed long enough to become close. He looked older than I recalled, his shoulders rounded under a worn wool coat, and he held a thin manila envelope against his chest like it might burn him if he loosened his grip. "Jessica," he said, voice low, "I need to speak with you. It's about your father." I stepped aside without asking why he had come or how he knew where I lived. Something in his face told me this was not a social call. We sat at my kitchen table, the one Brian and I had bought the year we moved into this house. Peter kept the envelope on his lap for a long minute before he finally placed it on the table between us. "I've carried this for almost 2 years," he said. "Your father asked me to keep quiet. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but I saw how things have been going with you and Andrew, and I can't keep pretending I don't know what's happening." He slid the envelope toward me. Inside were photocopies of documents I had never seen before, pages from a family trust my mother had set up years earlier, pages with signatures I recognized and dates that made my stomach tighten. My father's name appeared on several transfers of interest in the waterfront property in Annapolis, the one we all still called the family house, even though the legal ownership had apparently shifted in quiet increments. My brother Andrew's name appeared alongside his on more than one page. My own name did not appear anywhere. "I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. "These look like they were done without anyone else knowing." Peter nodded once. "That was the point. Your father said it was to protect the family assets, to keep decisions in the hands of people who wouldn't question every move. He said you were too busy with your own life to be involved, and Andrew understood the bigger picture." The words landed with a weight I had not expected. I had spent years being the one who showed up when something needed doing, helping with repairs at the waterfront house, covering unexpected costs, when my father mentioned money was tight, listening when my brother called late at night complaining about pressure at work. I had done it because I believed we were a family that took care of its own. The idea that they had been making decisions behind my back while accepting my help felt like a door closing somewhere inside me. Peter stayed another half hour. He did not offer dramatic explanations or try to soften what he had shown me. He simply said he could not watch my father and my brother continue to treat me as though my only role was to be useful and unquestioning. Before he left, he gave me the name of a lawyer he trusted, Christine Hale, and told me to call her if I wanted to understand the full scope of what the documents meant. After he was gone, I sat at the table with the envelope in front of me for a long time. The house was quiet. Brian was working late at the hospital again, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. I thought about the long weekend we had planned at the waterfront house in Annapolis. My father had suggested it weeks earlier, saying it would be good for all of us to spend a few quiet days together before the weather turned. My brother had agreed immediately. I had said yes because saying no had never felt like an option I was allowed to consider. Now the invitation felt like something else entirely. I did not sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pages Peter had left, the signatures that excluded me, the dates that lined up with times I had been asked to contribute money or time without being told why it was truly needed. In the morning, I called Christine Hale. She agreed to meet me the next day. I did not tell my father or my brother about Peter's visit. I simply packed a small bag for the long weekend and drove to the waterfront house on Friday afternoon as if nothing had changed. The house sat at the end of a narrow road that curved along the water. It was the same house I had visited every autumn since I was a child. White clapboard wide porch facing the bay, the dock where my brother and I used to fish when we were small. My father's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. My brother's truck was parked beside it. I sat in my own car for a moment before getting out, watching the water move under the gray October sky. My father came out onto the porch as I was unloading my bag. He looked the same as always, tall, still, straight-backed at 68, his hair more silver than it had been the last time I saw him. He smiled when he saw me, the easy smile he used when he wanted everyone to feel at ease. "Jessica," he said, "you made good time. Your brother and I were just starting a fire in the pit out back. Come on in. Your mother's in the kitchen." I followed him inside. The house smelled like wood smoke and the faint salt of the bay. My mother was at the counter cutting vegetables for a salad. She looked up and gave me the same warm smile she always did, the one that said she was glad I had come, but did not ask why I looked tired. My brother was on the back deck stacking wood. He waved when he saw me through the glass doors, but did not come inside right away. We spent the first evening the way we always did on these weekends, simple dinner conversation that stayed on safe topics, the kind of easy rhythm that had made me believe for years that we were a close family. My father asked about my work. My brother talked about a project he was managing. No one mentioned the documents Peter had shown me. No one asked why I had been quieter than usual on the drive down. Later, after my mother had gone to bed and my brother had stepped outside to take a call, my father and I were left alone in the living room. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and offered me one. I shook my head. "You've been working too hard lately," he said, settling into his usual chair. "I can see it on your face. That's why I wanted us all here this weekend. No distractions, just family." I looked at him across the low table between us. The firelight made the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm, "why didn't you ever tell me about the changes to the trust?" He did not flinch. He took a slow sip of his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Because it wasn't something you needed to worry about," he said. "Andrew and I handled it. You've got your own life, your own responsibilities. We didn't want to burden you." The answer was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed it for a second. Then I thought about the pages in the envelope, the signatures, the way my name had been left off every transfer. "I've been contributing to this house for years," I said. "I've helped with repairs, with the taxes, when you said things were tight. If decisions were being made about ownership, I think I had a right to know." My father's expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened just slightly. "Jessica, you've always been the responsible one. That's why we count on you. But counting on someone doesn't mean they get to question every choice the rest of the family makes. Your brother understands that. He's always been willing to step up when it matters." The words landed exactly where he intended them to. I felt the old familiar pull, the guilt that had kept me quiet for so long, the sense that questioning anything made me the difficult one, the one who didn't understand the bigger picture. I had heard variations of this my entire adult life. Every time I asked for clarity, the conversation circled back to how much the family needed me to be steady, to not make waves. I did not argue with him that night. I simply said I was tired from the drive and went upstairs to the guest room that had been mine since I was a teenager. I lay awake listening to the water against the dock and the low murmur of my brother's voice on the deck below. He was still on the phone. I could not make out the words, but the tone was familiar, deferential, careful, the voice he used when he was speaking to our father. The next morning the house felt different, though nothing obvious had changed. My mother made coffee and asked if I wanted to walk along the water before breakfast. I said yes. We walked in silence for a while, the way we often did. She had never been the one to push conversations. That had always been my father's role. Halfway down the dock she stopped and looked out at the bay. "Your father means well," she said quietly. "He's always believed that protecting the family means making the hard decisions so the rest of us don't have to." I wanted to ask her what she knew. I wanted to ask if she had seen the same documents Peter had shown me, But something in the way she stood, shoulders slightly hunched against the wind eyes fixed on the water, told me she had already decided how much she was willing to say. I know he believes that, I answered. I'm just not sure anymore that it's true. She did not respond. We turned and walked back toward the house. That afternoon, my brother asked if I wanted to help him check the boat. It was the kind of small task we had done together for years. I went with him because refusing would have drawn more attention than I was ready to handle. We worked in near silence, checking lines and clearing debris the recent storms had left. When we were almost finished, he spoke without looking at me. Dad told me Peter came to see you. I kept my hands steady on the rope I was coiling. He did. Andrew straightened and wiped his hands on a rag. He shouldn't have done that. It wasn't his place. Dad's been handling things the way he always has. You know how he gets when people start questioning him. It only makes everything harder for everyone. The words were so casual, so matter-of-fact that for a moment I almost laughed. My brother was not angry. He was not defensive in the way people are when they are hiding something dramatic. He was simply stating what he believed was obvious. Our father's way of doing things was the correct way, and anyone who disrupted it was creating unnecessary problems. I looked at him across the small deck of the boat. Andrew, those documents show the property interests were moved without telling me. I've been paying into this place like it was still partly mine. How long have you known he met my eyes for the first time? There was no guilt there, only a kind of tired patience. Jess, you've always been the one who leaves when things get complicated. You moved to the city, you built your own life. Dad and I stayed here and dealt with the day-to-day. It made sense for us to handle the legal stuff. You would have just worried. The justification was so clean, so practiced that I recognized it immediately. It was the same reasoning my father had used the night before. They had told each other this story so many times that it had become truth to them. I was the one who had stepped away. I was the one who didn't understand the weight of keeping everything together. Their loyalty to each other and to that story had become more important than any loyalty they owed me. I did not argue. I simply finished coiling the rope and stepped off the boat. As I walked back toward the house, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a clear, cold recognition. The family I had believed in did not exist in the way I had thought. There were agreements I had never been part of, decisions made in rooms I was not invited into, and a quiet understanding between my father and my brother that my role was to support without question. That evening, as the light faded over the water, Deborah Mills arrived. She was an old friend of my mother's, the kind of woman who had been at every holiday for decades but rarely stayed late. She carried a small covered dish and an expression that looked like she had been arguing with herself all the way to the door. She asked to speak with me alone after dinner. We stood on the porch while the others stayed inside. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the fire pit. "I've known your father a long time," she said, voice low. "I've watched how he handles things. I told myself it wasn't my business. But Peter called me yesterday. He said he'd finally shown you the papers. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what was happening." She told me what she had seen over the years. Quiet conversations between my father and my brother, documents signed in the study, late at night times when my contributions had been accepted with gratitude that never quite reached their eyes. She did not have proof of everything, but she had enough pieces to confirm what Peter had started to show me. The pattern was consistent decisions made, information withheld, guilt used like a tool whenever anyone came close to asking the wrong questions. "I'm sorry," she said before she left. "I should have said something sooner. I just didn't want to be the one who broke the family apart." After she was gone, I stayed on the porch for a long time. The water was dark now, the lights from the house reflecting in small broken pieces on the surface. Inside, I could hear my father and my brother talking, their voices low and steady, the same easy rhythm they had always shared. My mother was probably in the kitchen cleaning up in her quiet way. I thought about the weekend we still had ahead of us, 2 more days of the same careful conversations, the same unspoken rules. I thought about the documents in my bag, the ones Peter had given me, and the notes I had made after talking with Christine Hale earlier that day. I thought about the years I had spent believing that loyalty meant staying silent when something felt wrong. The wind moved through the trees along the shore. Somewhere out on the bay, a boat motor hummed and then faded. I stayed where I was, letting the cold settle into my coat, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the old pull to go back inside and smooth everything over. I knew the rest of the weekend would not be easy. I knew my father would continue to speak as though his way was the only reasonable one. I knew my brother would stand beside him loyal in the way he had always been, but I also knew something else now, something that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity. The story they had built together did not have room for me unless I accepted the role they had written, and I was no longer willing to play it. The next morning, the house felt smaller than it had the day before, even though the sun was bright on the water, and the air coming through the open windows still carried the clean smell of the bay. I came downstairs to find my father already at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the newspaper spread in front of him. My mother was at the stove flipping pancakes the way she always did on these weekends. My brother was leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone. My father looked up when I walked in. "Morning, Jessica." "Sleep all right?" I nodded and poured myself coffee. The envelope Peter had given me was still upstairs in my bag, but the weight of it seemed to have followed me down. I sat across from him and watched the steam rise from my mug. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice even, "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about the trust and the property. I'd like to understand why my name wasn't on any of the transfers." He folded the newspaper slowly the way he did when he wanted a moment to choose his words. "We talked about this already. Andrew and I handled it because it made sense at the time. You were building your career moving around. We didn't want to pull you into paperwork that didn't need your attention." My brother set his phone down. "Jess, you're making this bigger than it is. Dad's always looked out for the family assets. You know that. If you'd been around more, maybe you would have been looped in, but you weren't. That's not anyone's fault." The words were delivered without heat, almost gently, the same tone he used when he explained things to people at work who didn't understand the bigger picture. I looked at him and saw the same expression my father wore, patient, slightly weary, as if I were the one creating difficulty where none needed to exist. "I've been around enough to send checks when the taxes were due," I said, "and to come down here every time something needed fixing. That seems like it should count for something." My mother set a plate of pancakes in the middle of the table and sat down without speaking. She kept her eyes on her own mug. My father reached for the syrup and poured it in a slow, deliberate line. "Jessica," he said, "loyalty in a family isn't about keeping score. It's about trusting that the people who stay close know what's best. Your brother has always understood that. He's never questioned whether we had his best interests at heart." The sentence landed exactly where he meant it to. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the old reflex to apologize for asking to smooth the moment so everyone could go back to the comfortable version of us. I took a breath and let it pass. "I'm not keeping score," I said. "I'm asking for clarity. If the property we all use has changed hands without me knowing, I think I deserve to know why." My brother pushed his chair back and stood. "You know what I'm going to check the dock lines before the wind picks up. Dad, you coming?" My father nodded and rose without looking at me again. They walked out together, the screen door closing behind them with a soft snap. My mother stayed at the table, tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. "He's not trying to hurt you," she said after a moment. "Neither of them is. They just don't see the point in turning everything into a discussion." I looked at her. "And what do you see, Mom?" She met my eyes for a second, then looked back at her coffee. "I see a family that's held together for a long time by not asking too many questions. I'm not sure I know how to do it any other way." She stood and began clearing plates. The conversation was over. I spent the rest of the morning on the porch with a book I didn't read. The water moved in small, steady waves against the shore. My father and brother worked on the boat for a while, their voices carrying across the yard in low, easy exchanges. Every so often, one of them would glance toward the house. I could feel the weight of those glances even from a distance. Around midday, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Laura Bennett, a cousin I hadn't seen in years. She lived on the other side of Annapolis and had come to a few holiday gatherings when we were younger. The message was short. Peter told me what he showed you. I think I need to talk to you. Can I come by this afternoon? I replied yes before I could second guess it. She arrived just after 2, driving a small silver car that crunched over the gravel driveway. She was a few years older than me, with the same careful posture I remembered from family photos. She carried a canvas tote and wore the expression of someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say and still wasn't sure it was enough. We walked down to the end of the dock where the wind was stronger and voices from the house wouldn't carry. Laura kept her hands in the pockets of her coat. I was there the day some of those papers were signed, she said. Your father asked me to witness a couple of them. He said it was a formality that Andrew was stepping into more responsibility because you had your own life. I signed because I didn't want to make a scene. I've regretted it ever since. She looked out at the water as she spoke. He made it sound like protecting you, like you wouldn't want the stress. But I saw how he talked to Andrew about it afterward, like they had agreed on something the rest of us weren't supposed to question. I should have said something then. I didn't. The confirmation settled over me with a strange calm. It was not new information exactly, but hearing it from someone who had been in the room made the pattern impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding. Did my brother know you were there? I asked. Laura nodded. He was the one who called me to come over that day. He said Dad needed another set of eyes on the paperwork and that it would be easier if it stayed in the family. I thanked her. She left the tote with me. Inside were her own copies of a few pages and a short handwritten note she had written to herself after that day, dated almost 3 years earlier. She had never mailed it. She had simply kept it the way people keep evidence of something they hope they will never have to use. After she drove away, I stayed on the dock for a long time. The tote sat at my feet. I could hear my father and brother laughing about something on the boat. The sound was ordinary, the same laugh I had heard on 100 other afternoons here. It was the ordinariness that made everything sharper. When I went back inside, my brother was in the kitchen making sandwiches. He looked up when I came through the door. Laura was here, he said. It was not a question. She was. He set the knife down. Jess, you're turning this into something it doesn't have to be. Dad asked her to witness because she was nearby and it was convenient. That's all. You're reading things into it because you're already upset. I looked at him across the counter. Andrew, she told me you called her. She told me you said it would be easier if it stayed in the family. That doesn't sound like convenience. That sounds like a choice. He wiped his hands on a towel and folded it carefully. You've always been good at finding problems where there aren't any. Dad and I have been handling the heavy stuff for years while you built your life somewhere else. Now you show up with questions and expect everyone to stop and explain themselves. That's not how this family works. The sentence was delivered without raising his voice. It was simply stated as fact. I felt the ground shift a little further beneath me. My brother was not lying to protect my father. He genuinely believed what he was saying. The loyalty between them was so complete that any challenge to it could only be framed as my failure to understand. I did not argue. I took one of the sandwiches he had made and carried it upstairs. In the guest room, I opened Laura's tote and spread the pages on the bed. The dates lined up with times I remembered being asked for money or help. The signatures were all there, my father's, my brother's, Laura's as witness. My name remained absent from every line. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand. Christine Hale's number was saved from the day before. I could call her, now tell her what Laura had added, ask what the next step would be, or I could go back downstairs and try one more time to make them see that the story they were telling did not include me. I did neither. Instead, I opened the small drawer in the bedside table where I used to keep old letters when I was younger. At the very back, tucked beneath a stack of faded postcards, was another envelope I had not noticed before. It was addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, the ink slightly faded. There was no postmark. It had never been mailed. I held it for a long moment before I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated 4 years earlier in my mother's careful script. It began with my name and ended with a sentence that made the air in the room feel thinner. I signed what they asked me to sign because I didn't know how to refuse, but I want you to know the property was meant to stay in all three of our names. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I hope you find this before it's too late to change anything. The letter was not long. It did not explain every transfer or every conversation I had missed, but it confirmed in my mother's own hand that the exclusions had not been an oversight. They had been deliberate, and she had known. I folded the page and slipped it back into the envelope. Downstairs I could hear my father's voice and my brother's answering it, the low, steady rhythm of two people who had long ago decided what the truth was and had no interest in revisiting it. I stayed in the guest room until the light outside began to fade. When I finally went downstairs again, the three of them were in the living room. My father was in his chair. My brother was on the couch. My mother was knitting something small and blue that I could not identify. My father looked up. We were just talking about whether to grill tomorrow or go into town for dinner. What do you think, Jessica? I looked at each of them in turn, the man who had raised me, the woman who had written the letter now in my pocket, the brother who had chosen the same story my father told. The question hung in the air between us, ordinary and loaded at the same time. I thought about the envelope upstairs, the pages Laura had given me, the letter in my pocket, and the years I had spent believing that staying quiet was the same thing as being loyal. I think I said we should talk about something else first. The room went still. My father set his glass down. My brother leaned forward slightly. My mother's hands paused on the knitting needles. Outside, the wind moved across the water, and the last light of the day slipped behind the trees along the shore. Inside, no one spoke. The silence stretched thin and tight, like something that had been holding for a very long time and was finally beginning to give. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter my mother had written 4 years earlier. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded in secret. I laid it on the low table between us, beside the copies Laura had given me and the pages Peter had carried for 2 years. My father stared at the letter without touching it. My brother leaned forward, eyes narrowing. My mother set her knitting down in her lap and did not look at any of us. I found this in the guest room, I said, voice steady. Mom wrote it herself. She said the property was meant to stay in all three of our names. She signed what you asked because she didn't know how to refuse. That's not confusion. That's what happens when someone uses guilt and silence to keep control. My father picked up the letter, read it once, and set it back down. Your mother was not well when she wrote that. She worried about everything. I was trying to simplify things so no one had to carry the weight. My brother shook his head. Jess, you're turning one old letter into some kind of conspiracy. Dad has always done what he thought was right for the family. You show up with papers from people who weren't even here and expect us to rewrite everything. That's not fair to him. The words were calm, almost kind, the same tone he had used my whole life when he explained why I was the one who didn't understand. I looked at him and saw the cost of that loyalty written across his face, the way he had learned to defend first and ask questions later, the way he had accepted the role of the son who stayed close and never challenged the story. I turned back to my father. I've spent years sending money when you said the taxes were due, driving down when the dock needed work, believing that being useful was the same as being included. Peter showed me the transfers. Laura told me she was asked to witness because it was easier if it stayed in the family. Mom wrote this letter because she knew it was wrong and couldn't stop it, and you both decided I didn't need to know any of it. My father's expression hardened in the way it always did when someone pushed past the first layer of his explanations. Jessica, you have a good life. You have your husband, your work, your house in town. This place, these decisions, they were never supposed to be your burden. Andrew understood that. He's always been willing to carry what needed carrying. There, it was the same quiet leverage he had used for years. The suggestion that questioning him meant I was abandoning the family, that my brother's silence made him the loyal one, and my questions made me the problem. I felt the old reflex rise and let it pass without answering it. "I'm not asking to carry the burden," I said. "I'm saying I won't keep contributing to something I'm deliberately kept out of. I've already spoken with Christine Hale. She's going to review every document. If the trust and the property need to be corrected so that everyone's name is where it was always supposed to be, that's what will happen. And until that's clear, I won't be sending checks or showing up for weekends that require me to pretend I don't see what's in front of me." The silence that followed was different from the one earlier. It was heavier, more final. My brother stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room. My mother picked up her knitting again, but did not move the needles. My father stayed in his chair, looking at the letter as though it might disappear if he stared long enough. "You're choosing to make this difficult," he said at last. "After everything this family has given you." I stood. The words no longer landed the way they once had. "I'm choosing to stop pretending the story you built includes me on equal terms. That's not the same thing." I went upstairs, packed my bag, and called Brian to tell him I was coming home that night instead of staying until Sunday. He did not ask many questions. He simply said he would be there when I arrived. When I came back down, my father was still in his chair. My brother had gone outside. My mother met me at the door and touched my arm for a moment without speaking. The drive back to Annapolis was quiet. The water stayed beside the road for most of the way, dark and steady under the autumn sky. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the facts settle where they belonged, separate from the guilt I had carried for so long. In the weeks that followed, I met with Christine Hale twice. She confirmed what the documents already showed and helped me file the paperwork to request a full accounting of the trust. My name was added where it had always belonged. The transfers my father and brother had made were reviewed by a second attorney, Harlan Ellis, who specialized in family trusts. He told me the same thing Christine had. The exclusions had been deliberate and could be corrected without destroying the family assets, only the secrecy around them. I also began seeing Dr. Melissa Grant, a therapist my colleague Rachel Kim had recommended. In her office, I said out loud the things I had only thought for years, that I had confused being needed with being valued, that my brother's loyalty to my father had cost him the ability to see me clearly, and that my own loyalty had kept me small. She did not tell me I was right or wrong. She simply helped me hear myself. My father did not call. My brother sent one text 2 weeks after that weekend. "Hope you're doing okay. Dad's still upset, but he'll come around." I did not answer it. The distance was not punishment. It was the space I needed to stop arranging my life around their comfort. 3 months later, a second letter arrived, this one from the trust administrator. It confirmed every transfer, every signature, and the original intent my mother had written about. The surprise was not in the details. The surprise was how little the confirmation changed the way I already felt. I had the truth. I had boundaries. I no longer needed their version of the story to feel steady. On a quiet Sunday in January, I drove back to the waterfront house alone. The trees were bare, the dock empty, the house closed for the winter. I walked to the end of the dock and stood where Laura and I had talked months earlier. The wind off the bay was cold and honest. I did not go inside. I did not need to. I still love my family in the complicated way people love the places they come from. But I no longer confuse that love with permission to be kept in the dark or used as convenient support. My brother remains close to my father. My mother still sends holiday cards with careful, neutral messages. The easy weekends of the past are gone, and I do not miss the version of myself that accepted them. What remains is quieter and clearer. I choose where I give my time and my trust. I ask questions when something feels hidden. I let the silence after those questions stand instead of rushing to fill it. The loyalty I once gave without conditions now belongs first to the life I am building on my own terms. Blind loyalty had protected my father's control and kept my brother from seeing the cost to anyone outside their agreement. It had kept me believing that being useful was the same as being seen. None of us escaped harm from it. The difference is that I finally stopped volunteering for my share of the damage. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt the quiet weight of being kept on the outside of decisions that should have included you, I hope this helped you see that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning your family. It is sometimes the only way to stop abandoning yourself. What would you do if you discovered the people you trusted most had built their version of family without room for your voice?